the hood because let's be honest, nobody's here for my face. All right, snap me open a beer. Sparkling water. Just kidding, I actually haven't had a drink of alcohol in almost 3 years now. In 1 week it'll be 3 years since I've had a beer, but this is my new jam. So I just wanted to sit down and have a little chat with you guys and tell you that I'm actually a terrible human being. I get a lot of messages from people and a lot of them I don't actually see. So in my message request folder in Facebook, I have a lot of questions that are unanswered, and I realized the other day that I have unanswered questions in here from January of 2020. So do the math on that, that's like almost 7 years. Actually, December 17th, 2019 is one question. So that's what we're gonna do in this video. I'm just gonna go through the questions, read them and answer them, and maybe we'll get something good out of it. We'll lower this down. I feel like an idiot staring up at the ceiling like this. Now I feel less inferior at eye level. All right, I'm gonna keep this pretty anonymous too, because I don't know if these people want their business shared out there. I might just give like a first name. This one's from Angel. It says, hello, good evening, sir. I'm reaching out to you when I seen your post on a car channel. I just started a car channel 2 months ago and would love to maybe get some pointers from you. If you have the time, I would certainly appreciate it. Oh man, this is probably like almost a whole video in itself. And Dane Thompson at Burn Down channel on YouTube actually just did a video on this, and that'd probably be a good one that I'll recommend because he just did the video like a couple weeks ago, and goes through like 5 tips for starting an automotive YouTube channel, and I think it's pretty good. But a quick summary, in my opinion, is just do things that you're passionate about, do things that you want to share with people, and that'll help you stay motivated to keep making videos, because YouTube favors like posting frequently and watch time and all that stuff. So if you do things that you want to do, it doesn't become work, and you do things that you're doing regularly already, you might have content to upload frequently. And the big thing is like, don't try to jump in doing it for money. So like I started YouTube in like 2009, before the partnership program was ever even a thing, and I was just uploading car audio videos and stuff that I'm working on regularly. So I just kind of never really stopped doing that, and eventually was able to monetize the channel, and that's always a benefit. But I would say don't jump into it thinking that like I'm gonna be a YouTuber and I'm gonna grow my channel and I'm gonna make some money, because that's not gonna happen most likely. Unless you have like really well done, unique content that can somehow get out there, it's going to be really challenging. YouTube now seems like it's less just small people putting up what they want to do. It's really competitive with like a lot of people that have really big budgets to make videos and do it full time. So don't let that discourage you. All right, Jacob. Hey man, I just saw your post about VATs on the LS Ranger swap page. I realized that, ironically enough, I've been watching a lot of your videos for the past week, and I'm starting on my mildly built LQ4 for my Explorer. I was wondering if you ever do VATs removal and changes for people. So I'll stop there. I usually do not. I am not a tuner. I don't promote myself as a tuner. I share content that I'm doing with my own stuff and tuning, and I'll try to help people here and there, but I don't do any like paid services or anything like that. So no, that's just not something that I do. I was actually watching earlier this morning in the video about how you integrated your LS and Ranger harness together, haha. It seems like you're extremely knowledgeable around this topic, and I've been having a hard time finding someone who can and will do the VAT stuff for my ECU. Well, I hope, because this was in January of 2020, I hope that you found somebody to do the VAT stuff for you. If it's something that you'd be interested in doing or have a recommendation. I do have a recommendation actually, and it's the person that did my VATs delete on my first swap, and I always recommend him because he did mine years ago and helped me out, and he still does it now. So his name is Kenny Cash, and he's on a lot of the LS pages. Kenny Cash did my VATs delete like 5 years ago, before I owned HP tuners and ever started doing any of my own tuning stuff. And at the time it was like $75. I shipped the ECU to him. He did the VATs delete, like gear and tire change, O2 delete, all that stuff, and shipped it back. And at the time it was like $75, but that was like 5 years ago. So it's probably more than that, 100, 150. Not sure exactly what he's doing it, but I always tag him when I see somebody asking on the pages. Name's Kenny Cash. I will say though, if it's somebody local, I'll send him to Hunter at Hunter Tuned YouTube channel. Hunter's a good friend of mine. He's local to me, and if people local have tuning stuff, I'll send them to him. Okay, so this one is actually a screenshot someone posted from the LSZG page where they're doing like 350Zs and G35 LS swaps. So I did a 350Z a while back, And the comment here is asking about my comment getting deleted and Matt Happel getting banned from the LSZG page. So Matt Happel and myself both got banned from the LSZG page when we were doing our budget swaps. So Matt first did his like budget swap with the truck intake, and then he posted the dyno results and the budget swap, and that really pissed people off on that page. And I did my budget swap, like $3,000 to LS swap the 350Z, and that really got people irritated because that group is like really high dollar builds a lot of the time, like $25,000, $30,000 swaps into their 350Zs and stuff that they're doing. So when we did those, that like really got people kind of irritated, and we both got banned from the group. One of the admins though later on is actually in the Sloppy public page. I mentioned something that I got banned and he actually let me back into the group now. So I'm in that group, but I don't have the car anymore. I see stuff, but I don't really post in there much. But that was kind of funny. All right, hey man, shot in the dark, but I saw a comment you made in Sloppy a year ago, wondering about how your Sloppy trans brake is holding up after so long. So the Sloppy trans brake, Sloppy third gear spool mod, it holds up well. I've never had any issues with it. I don't really think I've heard anybody that had any issues that were directly caused by that. That seems like it's been a pretty popular topic lately though, because I did the Sloppy trans brake V2 with the Holley Terminator X where you use the auto manual shift mode. And that lately, like the last week or two, seems like it's been really popular. I've actually been getting a lot of questions about that and how to set it up. And that video got quite a few views on it. So I might redo a video, and I've been brainstorming a different method that adds a timer delay into it. So when you release the button, it keeps the two-step active until the gear change happens. So right now you're trying to balance when those two things happen. And I started working on a file last night that adds a timer delay in there. So overall, it is working. I moved to an actual trans brake now, but the Sloppy third gear spool mod still works pretty well. This one just says Facebook user, so I don't even know who this is. How's it going? I have a question. I went to drop my pan on my 4L80 to change out my TCC solenoid because after the build it was shifting perfect and working. Took it out to work and it started slipping, coming from a red light, shifting hard. Once in gear, everything was fine. So I'm changing out that because everything else is new. Now when I went to suck the fluid out, not that much came out, and I noticed it wet by the converter. So I take that off and a lot of ATF and radiator fluid poured out from it. I don't think they're mixed, leaking from different places, but can the bolts on the pump leak? The converter looks dry and I figured either the bolts or the pan seal. Okay, that one was kind of hard to read. So the TCC solenoid is really going to only affect lockup. It's not going to affect any of your other gears or driving or anything else. It's really just going to affect when the lockup comes on. If you're like cruising and it's supposed to be locking up, you'd really want to see if it's not going to cause like slipping in any other gears. You could have slipping while it's in lockup and supposed to be locked up. But the question about the bolts leaking, yes, the bolts can leak, the pump can leak. If you rebuild it and you have your pump halves offset, shimmed, weird, it can cause a leak, or it can actually press into the case hard and not want to come back out, and it can leak from there. So, and that actually happened on mine when I rebuilt it and put it back in. The bolts were leaking. I didn't replace the seals on them, but I did RTV them now. But then I also had the pump shimmed a little bit weird. It wasn't lined up perfectly because I've done a decent job eyeballing the pump halves, putting them together, but this time it was a little bit off and it actually was leaking from the pump. So yeah, it can leak from the pump. So I would say in this situation, if you're leaking a bunch of fluid out of it and not a lot came out, that's probably why it started slipping. It probably leaked a bunch of fluid out of it, and now it's not working. So I would think it would be more from the low fluid than the torque converter clutch solenoid. So now every time I do a rebuild, I bought a tool for lining the pump halves, and I plan to either replace the seals on the pump bolts. There's a little plastic rubber seal on the backside of the bolts. So I will replace the bolt seals or RTV them. Hi, I was talking to the guy from Hunter Tuned. His name is Hunter. And he said you rework stock LS harnesses to make them standalone. If so, how much would you charge? Well, this was 3 years ago. I haven't reworked a stock harness since I switched to, I would say since I switched to the micro squirt stuff. That was like, came with a harness, and then after that I switched to the Holley stuff. I haven't reworked a stock harness in, I don't know, probably 4+ years now. So I don't do them. I have a harness laying around that I might end up using for something someday, but now with the Holley Terminator X stuff and the price that everything is, it just doesn't make sense now to rework them in a lot of cases, depending what you're doing, especially on a setup that has like a turbo and stuff like that. So I might, someday do it again if I'm trying to do a real budget swap with just a stock ECU, not doing a turbo or something like that. But yeah, it's not really like a service that I would do for other people. I do have the videos on how to do it, so that's kind of like how I work, I guess, is like, I'd rather do it, make the video, show people how to do it, and then say like, here's the tool. A lot of times it comes down to time. I don't really have time to do a lot of the stuff because I'm doing other things though. So I have been trying to branch out a little bit into like doing stuff for people. Like I did Tim, the rebuild on the Mustang. I've done a couple transmissions for people. I've done like some welding stuff. So I'm kind of trying to branch out, I guess, a little bit into taking on work for other people. But usually like friends or people that are close. It really like, it to me comes down to like a lot of people are really weird about stuff and like, do I want to deal with customers or not? That's really what it comes down to. Like the time and like, do I want to deal with people? Kind of makes me sound like an asshole, but that's the truth. All right, this one's from Nick. Love the channel. I've learned more about building my LS engine from you than any other YouTuber. I'm writing you today because I need a little help with assembling my engine. If you don't mind, could you help me out? Thanks in advance. The triple turbo Ranger idea is bitchin'. So these are the kind of messages that make me feel like really like shitty because it's just like, hey, I really appreciate you. Thank you. Can I ask you a question? And then I don't respond to it for 3 years. Good evening. Came across your YouTube channel, A21. I was wondering if you have a slowed down version of how to take an engine out of a Ford Ranger. No, I don't. So they're asking that because when I removed the engine originally from this truck, I just did a time lapse on it, and I don't have any of the original footage, and I didn't really feel like doing a 5-hour video on how to get the thing out of there, so I just did it as a time lapse. This might not be the correct way to reach out, but I'm in need of some help on a Ford Ranger project. I've been through multiple variations of the truck, starting with the Gen 353, a 6.2 from an Escalade, now back to a Gen 453, but this time with twins. Curious if I could ask you a few general questions about your Terminator X setup and how your base calibrations on the Setup Wizard. I have no tuners within 150 miles of me that are trustworthy, and I would rather figure this out myself. I tune the 5.3 and the 6.2 with HP tuners, so I have a general understanding of how the software works. I do have a couple videos that would probably help in that situation. The Wizard is pretty self-explanatory, I think, and I feel like it's something that you shouldn't really overcomplicate because the Wizard tune is just something that gets you up and like started. It's not like I'm gonna go drive this thing forever on this tune. Some people do and it works. But I usually just put in like generalized settings for injector size, if it's close in size, the cam size. I always just pick the cam that's in like the middle. I don't even look at the specs and put it on there. I just pick the one that's in the middle every time. I'll just pick something that's close. I don't look at much of the data or anything. Like if I have 1400, like these are 1400 injectors, the Snake Eater Genuine Bosch 1400 line, and I think I put like a 1500s option in there when I originally did the Wizard in there. So it doesn't even need to be close. And I started up on gas scale with E85, so the fuel's already 30% off. The injector size is 100 pounds an hour off. The cam might not even be the right option, but it still starts and runs the truck. I've never had an issue like with any of the Wizard startup tunes, so it doesn't really need to be that close. And I think people get like over paranoid with like, it has to be the exact same right stuff. Like I saw somebody on one of the Facebook groups that was going back and forth, like asking questions for over the course of multiple days about not having the right injector model number in the drop down. And they called Holley, and Holley told them that they have to like buy new injectors, and they're like talking about getting a new harness and all of this other crap. And like, dude, just pick something that's close and get it to run. This isn't gonna be your final tune that's on it anyways. You're gonna get it up and running and take it to a tuner. It doesn't have to be perfect. So that's just the general like get you up and running kind of thing. And then I do have a couple videos on just like general startup and into boost kind of things. But that last part on there about tuning it with HP tuners and then transitioning to Holley. HP tuners in a way can be like overly complicated to do simple things. And when you move from HP tuners, like if you have a general idea or a good understanding of how HP tuners works, and general tuning concepts and moving over to a Holly, things seem like almost too easy. Like, I think I remember talking to like Matt and Hunter when I switched to the Holly. I'm like, is this really how easy this is? Like, not saying tuning in general is easy, but just if I want to change the axis on something, I just put in the number that I want on it. Where HP tuners, you can't change the axis on anything. You can't rescale the tune by just like changing 35 to 40. You have to do a bunch of weird stuff, or you can't change it at all, or it's really complicated to do it. So if you understand generally how to get something running and running well with HP tuners, switching over to a Holly is kind of a breeze once you understand the software. At least that's kind of how I felt about it, where doing things that was the right way to do it on Holly, I felt like I was doing it wrong because I was so used to how HP tuners worked, where you have to like submit a DNA sample if you want to change your map sensor. Ryan, sorry to bother you. I watched your Holly integration video and I'm trying to figure out how to split the VSS signal so that Holly and the factory ECU both see the signal. I'm running a 4L60 and a 246 transfer case as of now. Thank you for your help. I just split the signal. Took one of the wires from the sensor and then split it, and then sent one to the Holly and then one to the stock ECU, and that worked. And to clarify what he's talking about, if you're not familiar, that was on my Escalade, and I integrated a Holly into it. So the Holly was running the engine and transmission, and then the stock ECU was still running like everything that would go to the body control module, the dash. It ran the fuel pump, the fans, the AC, all of that stuff. So the factory ECU was doing some things, and then the Holly was doing other things, and those all work together. So you're splitting things like your speed signal, your cam sensor, coolant temp sensor, stuff like that, where both ECUs are seeing the same signal. So, all right, I'm doing a similar setup that you did a while back. 5.3 microsquirt S475, Snake Eater 1500s, pulled my 80-pound injectors out. Now I'm really struggling with the 1500s. Would you happen to have a base map that you would at least get me in the ballpark? I do not. So I didn't spend very much time with the microsquirt. I used it for a little bit in the Mustang, and then that was like, Matt Apple sent me that to try it out when they released the plug-and-play harnesses for the microsquirt. So I'll put that on for a little bit just to test that thing. And then shortly after that, switched over to the Holly stuff, and I've been using Holly ever since then. So I don't really have a whole lot of experience with the microsquirt, megasquirt stuff. I've used the Tuner Studio a little bit just with that, but not very in depth. I do get questions sometimes about the microsquirt stuff, and the way I usually answer that question is I'm not really confident to give answers on it because I just don't have very much experience with it. Well, I watch your YouTube channel often, and it is great. I had a question about the Duramax intercooler you had on the Escalade. Did it work well on keeping the intake temps down, or have a big pressure drop across it? I'm in the middle of putting together my truck now, and I wasn't sure if it would work as a standard eBay intercooler. Well, the standard eBay intercoolers are junk, and they don't work very well at all. I have one here I can show sitting out right now. So this is the one that I had in the Ranger, and you can see the top and bottom are actually bowed out. And I think this was before I went to twins, so I want to say the most I ran through this thing was maybe 18 pounds of boost, and it's all bowed out. Like it's swollen from that much pressure. It did not do a very good job of keeping the temps down. With the GT45 and the 7875 I had with that intercooler, I would still see intake temps over 200 degrees on a quarter-mile pass. So that one didn't work at all. I don't think didn't work very good. Now, the Duramax intercooler is gigantic. So, and if you're not familiar with that build, that was a 2005 Escalade, and ended up using a Duramax intercooler in it and kind of modifying the core support to get that thing to work and fit in there, and it actually fit pretty nicely with some work, and it did do a good job on that setup of keeping the intake temps down. It's a gigantic intercooler. I want to say my temps were around like 150, 160 with that on a quarter-mile pass, and that was with the 88103, so it did pretty well. The challenge with it is the physical size, and it's not exactly easy to get in there. So some of the Silverados and stuff, it's like a direct bolt-in, depending how the frame is done. And the Escalade was close, but I had to do quite a bit of modification to get it in there to get it to fit. So it's kind of weigh your pros and cons. You might be able to get a little bit better intercooler in a smaller size with a thicker core that fits in there better. But the benefit for some of the trucks is that it's like a direct bolt-in. Can I ask you what you got for the Cadillac when you sold it? I want to say I sold that Escalade for like $12,500-ish. Maybe it was around there. Ryan, I think I talked to you before the holiday about building me a couple of the Holley dash output harnesses. I got your number before somehow, and I don't remember it now. I don't build the Holley output harnesses, but there's a guy named Jeffrey Mink, and he's who I got them from, and he's on Facebook, and he makes the harnesses. So I will post that on there somewhere if I can find his page or a link. And he's the one who made the harness for my 6.86 dash that I had. I live in Quebec, and we don't really have a resource for turbos. I noticed you're using an 88103 VS Racing. I would like to use it on my 427. What do you think? Sorry for the errors. I use translation software. I speak French. Thank you. Sweet. Technology. Yeah, I think the VS Racing's 88103 on my Escalade, the drawbacks I had with that turbo setup were my own fault and how I built it. So it was a 5.3, and I used a converter from a different vehicle. It was one that I bought used from someone else for this truck, and then eventually transferred it over, so it wasn't spec'd properly. And I had a stage 3 cam in a heavy truck, and the converter was too tight. So I think the drawdowns, or my drawbacks that I had with that turbo, with spooling and other stuff, were just because the combination wasn't right. And I really do like the 88103 turbo, and I would like to do another setup someday with an 88103 on it, because they do perform really well. I just built it wrong, basically, and it was kind of, it was good to drive, fun to drive on the street. Like, it didn't make a whole lot of torque down low, so it didn't spool the turbo very well, and it was like really good up top, but it took a long time. Like, it was tough to get a 6,000 pound vehicle moving with the combination that I had. All right, this one is from Joseph. I would personally like to thank you for the 4L80 rebuild videos. You made it really helped me out a lot on my 1948 Chevy. Well, you're welcome, and you should actually thank the subscribers on this YouTube channel for those 4L80 videos, because I was never planning on ever making those videos, and then the transmission went bad in this truck, and I made a video, and I was like, what do you guys think? Should I try to rebuild it? Because I had never done anything with the 4L80 before, and I didn't want to do it. I wanted to just buy a different one and put it in there. Everybody in the comments was like, no, you should rebuild it and make a video. So I rebuilt it and made a video, and now that's like some of my most popular videos, and I've rebuilt a bunch of them now. I've done a bunch for myself and learned a lot along the way. I did have a lot of issues, but sometimes when you have a lot of issues, you learn a lot of things, and you learn how to not have those issues. So, not saying I'm like a transmission builder, but I have done a few that are working. So that's good. All right, this one's from Chris. I'm sure this is a question you've been asked a million times, but I saw your video on YouTube drilling the regulator. What sensor did you use for fuel pressure? Sorry if it's a pain in the ass, because it's obviously out there somewhere, but thanks in advance. I want to say in that setup, it's hard to say what I was doing then. I did use an AEM sensor for a while. I can't remember what vehicle I used that on. I think I used the AEM in my truck that I pulled out of the 350Z, because that one came with an AEM pressure sensor on it. I've used some low dollar motorsports pressure sensors, and I want to say that's like the only two brands that I've used. And the AEM was just because it came off a different vehicle that I had, and I didn't want to spend $1,700 for an AEM fuel pressure sensor. But the low dollar sensors work well, and they work well for me, and that's what I'm using all on the truck here. So I'll also touch on the drilling the fuel pressure regulator part of it. I use the PQY regulators. That's like the $30, $35 fuel pressure regulator. It has the 2 8s in, 8AN in, the 6AN out, and I've used those on several different builds now. The $35, they do work well. The downside with them is sometimes if you're running multiple pumps, like 2 450s, when the second pump comes on, it will overrun the regulator, and then you'll have higher than normal pressure. And it's tough to regulate it down to, say, 58 PSI where you want it. Sometimes it'll be like 65, 70 PSI. So the way around that is to drill the return orifice out the bottom of the regulator, and I have a video on how to do that and what size drill bit to use. So what I ended up doing was drilling out the return orifice and then shaving down the spring a little bit, and that seems like it's becoming a little bit more common now since that video has come out. So I'm able to get my base pressure down now to like mid 30s if I need to with that modification, where before it was in like the 70s. And it's just because the return orifice is way too small and it has a little bit high spring pressure. But for a $30 regulator, a little bit of monkeying around, it's a good option and it works. But if you are gonna buy it for $35 and you think you're gonna put it on the vehicle and run it with 3 pumps and not have it spray fuel everywhere, because that's not gonna happen. Usually they need to be tightened. All the bolts usually come on, they're loose. So if you don't tighten them around the diaphragm the first time you pressurize it, good chance it's gonna leak. But once all that stuff is dealt with, it is actually a good regulator, and it does rise one to one pretty well. I usually test the regulator with shop air to make sure that it is gonna rise 1 to 1, and I verify it against the map sensor in the vehicle. So with Tim, the gray Mustang that I did, I verified his before I gave it back to him, and it was rising like near exactly 1 to 1 on the map sensor with shop air on a mechanical gauge. So I feel like they're a good regulator for 30 bucks, just a little bit of monkeying around. But you know, what's your time worth? Is it worth it to mess with it for a half hour and then it's a good regulator, but you save $200? A lot of people like to say like my time is more valuable, but the truth is a lot of times like you're not paying yourself $700 an hour to work in your garage by yourself. And I think people forget sometimes that you need to go earn that money to buy the stuff. It's kind of a trade-off. I got it fixed as an open loop boost control. It's working good now, but not sure how to set it up for track use. I have no idea what that means. There's not really any context before that. Is there any way you can help me figure out how to build boost on the trans brake at lower RPM so I can leave on the street relatively mild? Well, there's a few ways to do this. Pulling timing seems to help, and adding fuel seems to help. The trick is to be able to get it to a certain boost level on your two-step and then start to pull timing from there. But it's kind of a balance because you can pull too much timing and then have it fall off the two-step also. Or if you pull timing too early, it's not going to come up to the two-step. So, and that's kind of what I was fighting with the Escalade, building boost there. The problem that I had with that was it would only build like 2 to 3 pounds of boost, and then when I would start to pull timing at that area, it wouldn't come up to the two-step, or it would fall off the two-step and then it wouldn't build. And then it was really strange because I could come out on a fresh cold start, get the engine temp up to 170, and then put it on the two-step and it would make 10 pounds, no problem. Like clockwork. First time out, cold start. Second time I would try to do it after it was already warm, it would never do it again. So I had that challenge there. But yeah, if you can get it up to make like 4 pounds and then start to pull timing at 4 pounds and then add some fuel in there, it'll usually help to build more boost at that time, at least from what I've played with. And it actually reminds me, there was somebody that posted, I think it was on the Holly Terminator X page last night. They had their x-axis was boost. They were doing a timing retard and their x-axis was boost. And they were wondering why it wasn't actually pulling the timing. But the issue was that they started to pull timing at like 3.6 pounds, but the car was only making 1 to 2 pounds of boost. So because it never hit that threshold on the x-axis of the 3.6 pounds, because it was only making 1 to 2, it never hit that 3.6 to be able to start to pull timing. So it has to be able to come up to a certain threshold to where you start pulling, otherwise it's not going to do it. But that can be kind of tricky. So you could actually be coming up on RPM and then start to pull timing, and then the RPM will just drop back off because it doesn't have enough power to continue to rise up to the two-step RPM. Thanks for all of the info and videos. It's been a ton of help through my build. I thought I had a video where you ported a truck fuel rail and fuel pressure regulator, but I can't find it. I'm overrunning the regulator with a Walbro 450, 8 feed, 6 return, trying not to have to put a regulator on it. So I did do that. It was something that I tried to do, and I did end up taking that off the truck, and then I went to one of the China rail setups on the truck intake, but I did some testing where I removed the truck regulator from the stock rails, and then I ended up porting out that whole section where the regulator was to try to get it to flow through there. Because the issue that I was still seeing was, while I had a regulator on the return side, I was still overpressurizing fuel at the rail. I had an issue with this truck a while back when I was messing with all that stuff. I used the regulated rail with the return on it, like the factory truck rail, and then I put a regulator on the return side, and it was actually like double regulating the rail, and I had like 130 psi fuel pressure at the rail, and I didn't realize it because I was adjusting pressure at the regulator, and pressure at the regulator was like 58 psi, but then the pressure at the rail was like 120. So the whole feed side from the pumps and at the rail was like 120, 130 psi, and I was at the track and I actually blew a line inside of the tank. I was pulling up to the staging lanes to stage, and the truck just died, wouldn't turn back on, and I ended up blowing a line inside the tank because the pressure was so high. So after that, I ended up taking the rail off and just going to like the China rails. So I wouldn't say the porting really worked that much, but it was a fun test. I saw your V-band on your header was going to do that for a custom set of S10 headers. Is that what you're working with? I think that's about my V-band on my driver's side manifold here. So I have a set of up and forward headers, and then I went around the steering shaft with a V-band. So I used like a wastegate V-band. It's like a 44 millimeter, 1.75 inch V-band, and I V-banded the rear section and then cut the flange here, split where the bolt hole is. So if I want to, I can just remove that whole rear section and pull the manifold off. So I think that's what he's talking about. But that is actually a set of like Flowtech headers or something like that. Someone who watches the channel actually gave me those manifolds, messaged me on Instagram and was like, hey, I have these and I'm not using them, you can have them. So thank you again for those. They're working out very well. Hi Ryan, didn't know if you might be willing to maybe point me in the right direction with my 4L80 build that I rebuilt a couple years ago. Trans has worked flawlessly, but I have a whirling type of sound that goes up and down with speed when in first and reverse. When it shifts to second, it goes away. I have read that it's somewhat normal, but didn't know if you had any experience with this. It may be what I might look at when I pull it out to try to fix it. By the way, I enjoy watching your videos and can relate being a dad of young kids and trying to fit time in to work on a car. So I not exactly sure on that one. My Turbo 400 that I had in the yellow Mustang initially had like a bad whining sound. And I think sometimes that can be from like a clogged filter can do that sometimes, where it's like not drawing in fluid. There's probably other causes. I'm not exactly 100% sure what those would be. When I rebuilt the transmission, the noise went away, but I rebuilt it, put new fluid in it, had a new filter on it. So maybe it was something there. But when I first got that transmission, it was a wreck. It was like pink fluid in it. Really, really not a great transmission. So I'm not surprised that it didn't make noise. Just watch your video. Hi Ryan, just watch your video on a mid-mount system. That's the Holley mid-mount accessory drive system. I'm on it, man. Do you know if the DR44 150 amp alternator would fit the manifold? Also, did you have to change the Holley balancer, or could I run the truck balancer? Okay, so that's actually a pretty good question. The Holley mid-mount system is actually like another 3/4 of an inch or an inch farther out than the truck system, like the truck accessory drive. So this is kind of what the Holley mid-mount system looks like. It's really tight and compact, and it's centered in like the middle of the engine. It pushes everything farther forward, where normally the alternator is like up higher and pushed back a little bit. So you have to use the Holley balancer that comes with it because everything is pushed forward. It's like its own unique spacing. And I have had a couple people message me now saying that they're using the DR44 alternator and that it doesn't fit on there and it actually hits the power steering pump. So this is the alternator that I have on there now, and this one fits good. This one is just like the pretty basic Gen 3 4-pin plug alternator. But I have had a couple people message me now saying that the DR44 doesn't fit and it actually hits the power steering pump. So in the first part of that message, he's referring to the budget mid-mount video that I did, because these kits are like $2,500 or something like that, and I pieced together the kit. You can type in like Holley mid-mount PDF and look through the PDF and it shows all of the part numbers for everything. Well, some of the part numbers. Some of them are Holley part numbers and some of them are other part numbers that you can use on there, like the belt, the tensioner, other stuff. So you can source them from other places and save money doing it that way instead of buying the complete kit from Holley. So that was the way that I did it. I just used a regular truck alternator, like junkyard truck alternator, instead of using the Holley alternator, because that one has like a different regulator setup and stuff. So it's like a $400 some alternator. Overall, I was able to save about $900 doing it that way. Not originally my idea. I saw the Fanatic Builds YouTube channel kind of pioneered that idea. That was his idea. He started doing that, and I was like, that is a genius. And I would like to have one of those things and save some money also. I want to play. I'm wanting to do an LS swap on a 2007 Ford Ranger. What parts and accessories will I need? So that can be a pretty difficult question to answer. And I think a lot of people doing their first swap think like, well, what parts do I need? I just need like a kit. And they think it's going to be like a couple different things. Like, well, do you buy this kit and this wire harness and these 7 bolts, and then you have a whole kit. But doing a swap, especially doing a budget swap, you're sourcing a lot of parts from a lot of different places. It's a lot more than just like buying a couple things to throw an engine in a car. So if you're looking for like a complete list, you're looking at everything down to even wire terminals and all of this other stuff and nuts and bolts, and depends how you want to do it. There's some kits out there, but doing like a kit for a Ranger, there's not a lot of stuff out there. There's a company called Oddball Motorsports that does some Ranger mounts, but a lot of the stuff you're going to end up having to kind of source on your own or build on your own. So that's always a really difficult question to answer, because there's like a million things that you actually need to get a swap running. Or you could give a basic list, like you need an engine, a transmission, a drive shaft, some motor mounts, engine harness, an ECU, a fuel system, but each of those different categories has a bunch of different things. This one says blurred video. I bet it's spicy. Oh, I seen your YouTube channel on your Ranger LS swap. Did you buy the mounts or make them? I actually made them. So on this truck, I originally made them by welding a factory Ranger mount and a factory GM LS mount together with little pieces of flat stock. And it worked for several years, and I took it out, and now I have like a universal LS swap mount kit in there from eBay or Amazon. It's like a $25 or $30 universal kit that comes with the engine plate with a bushing and then 2 flat pieces that you custom cut and weld in. And I've used them on here. I use them in the 350Z. I use that kit on Tim, the gray Mustang, and it does work well. Sometimes the bolt holes are a little messed up. They're a little misaligned, that bolt to the block, so you got to drill the holes out bigger. But for $20, what can you really expect? Hey man, do you always put 6 frictions in the direct on a 4L80, or do you just use 5? I was reading some say just to use 5 because of drag. What's your experience? So I don't think you need to move to a 6 clutch direct until you're like really high horsepower, like probably, I don't know exactly, but maybe 1,300 or more. I think I'm making 1,000 with this one, and I kind of did it just to do it. I don't think it's needed at this power level. 5 is adequate. Some of the debate around that is around extra friction and extra drag with the extra clutch, and some say that it's not worth it to do it. But having the 6 in there will have extra holding power, but I would say it's dependent on power level, and this truck at 1,000 probably doesn't need the 6, but I did it anyways. Thanks for all the hard work in your videos. I watched the 4L80 teardown video and was wondering what kit and hard parts you install in the kit. Do you have a list breakdown? So far I have a stock 09 4L80, and I bought a Summit 300M input and Sonex overrun kit sitting on the shelf. Thank you for your time. I guess kind of like the recipe that I've been doing lately is what I have in this truck, and this is like a 300M input shaft, so the billet input shaft, billet rollerized forward hub, upgraded intermediate snap ring, rollerized output, and depending if you're doing trans brake or not, dual feeding internally, and then sometimes running the 6th clutch in the direct drum. So I've done that combination on a few setups now. This one has a trans brake, did one with a different one with a D3, and then did one with extreme automatics valve body, and that seems to be working pretty well for me. So I do have kind of a list that I keep that's like a little spreadsheet I haven't really shared. It's just links to different stuff, like you can get Borg-Warner clutches. Oh, that's another thing. I use Borg-Warner clutches. Borg-Warner is like the factory 4L80 clutches, and those work well. Rock Auto sells the clutches. You can buy the clutches individually, and I forget the name of the gasket kit I've been using. Might be like Precision or something. Comes in like a It's like a black bag with white writing on it. I can't remember the exact name of it. Ryan, love your builds and your YouTube channel. What spark plugs do you run in your turbo LS cars? I run NGK BR7EF. Lower boost stuff, I would typically run like a TR6, which is pretty common. A lot of people using TR6s for lower boost, BR7EFs for higher boost. This is like, 25 pounds where I'm running this now. And then the next step up, people are using an NGK 8 rating plug. I forget the exact number on it. BR7EFs, and lately I've just been throwing those in everything. And I gap them to 18 thousandths. Yeah, the ones in this one are gapped to 18. This one is actually like a product offer from some company asking if I want to test something. Never responded to. Really good at promoting myself. That one is just a suspicious link, so it's probably healthy for me. Hey man, doing your sloppy spoiler mod on my truck currently and having a little bit of trouble getting it to work. Was wondering if you could help me out. So I've been getting a lot of those questions lately. Like I said, the last couple weeks about the sloppy spool mod. I went through it kind of quick in the video, and wiring is something that is kind of complicated for people. So I think the way that I explained it in the video didn't connect with a lot of people. I was essentially using a brake input to trigger another output that was gonna trigger the input for the two-step. So essentially what I could do is foot brake, flip on a switch that would put it in third gear, and then I would leave my foot on the brake and that would leave the two-step active. I could flip off the auto manual switch to drop it back into first gear, wait for the delay on the two-step, and then lift off the foot brake, and that would disable the two-step. So that's why I've been brainstorming this other idea. I might do a second video on that, like sloppy spool mod 2.5 or something like that. And maybe with a wiring diagram or something. That's what people have been asking for lately, is how to do the wiring on it. And for some reason, I put that video up 3 years ago, and for some reason, the last couple weeks, it's been ton of people asking me about it. It's dead for 3 years, nobody says a word about it, and then all of a sudden I have 50 people asking me about how to do this sloppy spool mod thing, which I didn't come up with that. I just found the way to do it on the Terminator X. I didn't come up with a general idea. That was on the Sloppy Mechanics page long before I was even messing with these things. Hey brother, I got a question about doing a swap from an 8-pin to a 6-pin throttle body on my Terminator X, and also tuning. Again, I don't really do the tuning stuff. Sometimes if I know how to help people, I'll try to help people, but I don't really do the tuning for people. Swapping from 8-pin to 6-pin. So on mine, I swapped from a 6-pin to an 8-pin. And what that required was adding an additional power in the ground, because the 6-pin has the power of the ground, and then it has the motor, and it has the power in the ground, the 2 motors, and then the 2 sensors. And then the 8-pin has, each sensor has its own power and ground. So to go from the 6-pin to the 8-pin, I was able to add a second power and ground, and then feed those other 2 pins, and then the throttle worked. But I think going down from an 8-pin to a 6-pin, I don't think it's as easy as just removing those wires. I think you have to do some kind of conversion on it. There's a company, I forget the company's name, that sells an adapter for doing it. I'm not sure what the name is, but in my case, on the Escalade, going from the 6-pin throttle to the 8-pin throttle, I was able to just add an additional power in the ground, and then it worked. Hi Ryan, I'm doing the Holly swap in my 04 Yukon Denali while keeping the stock gauges. Would you mind if I message you through here to ask some questions? Referencing the videos a lot. Sorry I did not see the message, but I do have the video on the Holly Terminator X integration, but again, like I said, wiring stuff sometimes that can be difficult to convey over a video. The way I understand it and explain it in my head might not connect with people as they receive it on the video. So that can be a challenge sometimes. Sometimes what makes sense in my head doesn't make sense in someone else's head. What I say in a video makes sense to me, but it may not make sense to other people. So they understand the concept, the broader concept of what's supposed to be happening, but not exactly how to do it. Well, like how to wire it and stuff like that. This one is just 2 missed calls. Good chance if you call me on Facebook, I'm not going to answer. Good afternoon. Love your 4200 build. I've actually got a sweet Datsun that I'm going to do a 4200 6-speed swap in and add some questions about your setup. I love it. If I can give you a call and go over what... Yeah, I don't really do the calls. Sometimes, yeah, I don't really do the calls, I guess. Maybe depends on the situation, but... So especially like with this one and the 4200 and the manual conversion, I'm still in the infancy of getting this to work and it hasn't worked yet. I think sometimes like when I put a video up showing like this is what I'm gonna do, people think that because there's a video that means it's like already done and working, and I have answers to questions that I haven't even come across yet on my own swap. So it's difficult for me to answer some things that I haven't even done yet. Basically all I have for this car now is the video that I did on the 6-speed swap and the kit that I bought, and all I did was go over the kit that I bought for it and planned to use. I didn't do the flywheel or the clutch or anything like that, so it's technically not even working yet at this point, but the transmission, the bell housing, and everything is adapted to the engine. That's pretty much where I'm at with this now. I don't have any really other insight at this point on like the workings of the clutch system and how to get that stuff dialed in. So maybe afterwards I would have more information, but at this point I don't really have anything else. Hey, you commented on my post on a 4L80 and I see that you have ran a D3 and an Extreme Automatics billet manual trans brake. What did you think of each setup? I'm having trouble with a slow 1-2 upshift with the D3. EA trans brake, the Extreme Automatics manual valve body 4L80 trans brake valve body, is not mine. I built that one for someone. He's local, and the transmission's been working well for him. I haven't driven the car. I don't know exactly how it feels or anything driving it. All I know is that the transmission is working well for him at this point. But the slow 1-2 upshift might be an issue with the transmission, and it may not even be fixed by swapping the valve body. So I would encourage to try to figure out what's going on with it and why it's a slow 1-2 upshift. There could be something else maybe internally with the transmission that swapping the valve body might not help. So like my D3, I initially had some issues with it that I ended up tracking down to being a solenoid issue. So it could be something similar to that. It could be a binding or sticking valve. It could be a solenoid issue. There could be something going on with that valve body or even inside the transmission. So maybe a little bit of time troubleshooting would solve the issue and not having to buy another valve body, especially if you bought the valve body because you want to have auto shift with your 4L80. That's why people usually buy a D3, is you want to retain the auto shift function and still have a trans brake. So there's definitely pros and cons to either one. If you switch to the Extreme Automatics, you lose the auto shift and then you're manually shifting each one. But I guess that's all I could say at this point, is maybe try to figure out what's going on with it or why it's slow shifting instead of just spending money and throwing a new one on there. Unless you just want to move to a manual valve body, and that's fine too. So another consideration too is the D3 is now being produced with a grinder style solenoid. So it's not using the factory shift solenoid style trans brake solenoids anymore. So you might get a faster acting brake that may be, closer in comparison to how the manual valve body style would work. I did see something on Jake's page about potentially being able to modify the older style setups to the new grinder style solenoid, so that might be an option too. But if it's the 1-2 upshift, wouldn't have anything to do with the trans brake, so that could be something entirely different. The solenoids could be dirty. The valves could be moving slow because there's dirt in the transmission. So I would maybe start by checking some of that stuff and see if you can fix it. Another thing also is a slow 1-2 upshift. Like what does that mean? Are you commanding the shift and then it's shifting 600 RPM later? Like you're commanding it with the Holly and then it's shifting 600, 700, 800 RPM later? Like that's not a problem with the transmission necessarily. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong either. Like you have to, at least on mine, I have to lead the shift RPM by about 800 to 900 RPM to make the shift point where I want it to shift. So I command the shift at 6,000 and then it actually shifts at like 6,900. Like the Holly V2 software doesn't have a speed input, So it just has the RPM input. So there's no other verification for the gear change to happen with the Holly. There is a racing transmission ICF now on the V3. Maybe get around some of that stuff, but there has been some talk lately about like shifts not happening when they're supposed to be on the 1-2 shift, especially with the Holly stuff. So what I do, I just set it early enough to where it's actually going to make the shift when I want it to make the shift. So in that software, if it says 6,000 and it shifts at 6,900 and I want it to shift at 6,900, I don't really care if it says 6,000 because it's not affecting anything else. So one other thing with the Holly that people have been seeing is based on the shift point and the RPM drop, it will shift 1-2, then 2-3 right away. So if you have your shift point set at 6,600 for 1-2 and then your 2-3 set at 6,600, you'll shift it at 6,600. It'll rise to say 7,200, and then your RPM will drop to 6,200 and then come back up to 6,600 and then shift again right away. So what it may end up looking like is that it's shifting 1-3 and it's like actually going 1 to 2 and it's getting the 2-3 command right away and then it shifts it into third. You may have to play with your 1-2 shift parameters, get it to shift earlier or separate your shift RPMs to get it to go 1, 2, 3 instead of just like 1-3. So yeah, and keep that in mind too, that with the 1-2 shift you will have to lead the RPM. So some people have been, what I've been seeing on like the Holly pages are, some people might set the shift command at 6,900 and then they have the rev limiter at 7,500 and it'll just go to the rev limiter because it doesn't make the shift. So they think that it's a problem with the transmission, or so the transmission is broken because it's not shifting at 6,900 and it's going to the rev limiter. So it seems like something's internally wrong with the transmission, but you're just not leading the shift RPM enough and having it happen early enough. Like I said, mine's at 6,000 and it makes the shift at 6,900. So that's a 900 RPM difference. So if I have my rev limiter set at 7,500 and I'm commanding the shift at 6,900, it's going to hit the rev limiter before it hits 7,800. So it's going to look like I'm hitting rev limiter and my transmission's not working. And then when I lift, it'll go to third and it looks like there's a transmission problem, but it's just where you're commanding the shifts. So that's it for this, guys. This is a pretty long video. All right, so yeah, I'm a terrible person. I don't check my messages. The only reason that I did see these messages is because someone tagged me in a Facebook group and asked a question and said, hey, I sent you a message. And then I went to go see the message and I found all these messages still sitting in there. So sometimes that's a better option. I feel like I see things a little bit more if I'm tagged like in a Facebook group. I do have my own Facebook group, Blazer Builds YouTube on Facebook, and you can post stuff in there, post questions. A lot of times then it's just not me answering the question. It's not a gigantic group and people are usually pretty respectful in that group. It's not like some of the other groups where you ask a question and you're going to get annihilated because you asked a question. So we try to be pretty respectful and answer questions in there. So that's another option. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.